inside the paint. Hey, Ira, we got the Knicks coming up tonight, and this is a game that Heat fans look forward to, we're 3-4 times a year. What do you see with this team, the Knicks team, and is this just a case you mentioned earlier in the show about kind of teams being the one-year wonders, the one-hit wonders, and then taking a step back? Do you think this is who they are, or is this kind of a blip and they're going to eventually return more to the team that we saw for the regular season last year?
No, I think this is who they are. I think Julius Randle has not shown this type of sustainability in his career. If he was, he would not have been dealt a couple of times already in his career. I thought the Fournier signing would do more for them, but apparently he only scores against the Celtics. So you have that. The Kemba Walker thing has been overstated, but we sort of have known that for a couple of years. I mean, look, I remember Kemba back in those Hornets series against the Heat. I mean, he was dynamic. He was everything to stop in those. So they have so many players who used to be someone. Taj Gibson, players like that. They've had a lot of injuries in the middle. Mitchell Robinson is questionable tonight. Nerlens Noel is questionable. So you have sort of that power conundrum there of what they have. And Thibodeau's teams tend to have a moment and then to have un-moments. With the Heat, you have 27 years of Pat Riley's way of doing it, of being driven. With Tom Thibodeau's team, because a lot of players cycle through, they don't know what they're in for until they realize what they're in for. The Knicks are a playing team. Maybe they find their stride at the right time, but there's so much question about the Knicks that when you look at the East, because the East is so much better. Look, I didn't expect Cleveland to be better than the Knicks, but they clearly are. I didn't expect Charlotte to necessarily be better than the Knicks. But even with their blip last night in Toronto, they've proven to be a better team with a better long-term outlook, with players who are playing almost, above the level of what Julius Randle's offering. So they've naturally, the Bulls, another team, naturally been pushed down by other emerging teams. Sustainability is hard. Mm-hmm. That's what they'd have had. They might not have had great playoff success, but they get to the playoffs. They've been able to sustain. I think simply the Knicks were not able to keep up with the rising East. I didn't see the East being this strong. We spoke about it in our first segment. 2 games separating number 1, the Heat, from number 6, the 76ers. The Knicks simply are not in that class.
Kane's 1989 asks about the Goran Dragic situation. What are the mechanisms of that as far as, and this is twofold, obviously. Number one, I don't want to say would the Heat want Goran Dragic back, but would there even be a place for him, a spot for him at this point? We've talked about the need for a backup point guard, and yet I feel like some other players have stepped up in that role. And number two, legally, contractually, what could the Heat even do? Because I know there were limits on what you can do when you trade a player to a team as far as eventually getting that player back.
The Heat can't bring Goran Dragic back. The only way Goran Dragic can come back to the Heat is if he's traded from Team A, Toronto, to Team B, any other team, and then he can be moved from Team B to Team C, the Heat. That's not happening. That would almost be a team trading for Goran's, $19.4 million contract, deciding they don't want him, releasing him, and then the Heat in the buyout market could. He would love to have Goran Dragic back. He fits well with the system. He knows the system. He would understand that Gabe Vincent's taking strides also, but he's a scorer. Clay, I was thinking about this the other day. I'm still a little bit confused why Toronto hasn't kept and played Goran more. They have nights like last night when Fred VanVleet's out that he could help. I think Goran Dragic will impact the Heat's playoff race, but not with the Heat. I look at Goran Dragic and I say to myself, you know what? He goes to the Sixers, especially with Ben Simmons out. They're a better team.
Yeah. He
goes to the Bulls. He gives them the type of backcourt depth that if Zach LaVine has his latest injury or DeMar DeRozan needs a rest day like he did when they played that tough game against Oklahoma City, he could.
And Lonzo.
So I think the Goran Dragic factor is going to impact the Heat, that they might actually wind up the Knicks, another example. They might actually wind up playing him in the playoffs. After February 10th, Goran Dragic will have no value whatsoever to the Raptors. He'll be an expiring contract who's not playing there anyway. The Raptors, as a courtesy, might as well just give him all his money and let him go where he wants. It's going to be very tempting. You must be released by a team by March 1st to be eligible for another team's playoff roster. You can be signed any day until the last day of the season. I think it's around April 10th. So I think Goran Dragic will have a Heat impact, but I think there's a really good chance it'll be against the Heat, unless maybe he goes to Dallas and goes somewhere in the West than with the Heat. I think Goran Dragic will come back into play after the trading deadline.
KJ asks about Victor Oladipo and whose minutes would he take if he were to, or when he does come back. And I'm gonna start by saying, I think so much of this is going to be matchup based.
True.
And you can't keep Tyler Hero off the floor.
Of course.
So I think what Tyler Hero brings, and I know I may be on an island here, I think Tyler Hero has evolved into the Heat's best pure scorer. And not just because, the numbers, but what he has in his bag, I don't know that anybody else on the team has right now. And look, I'll be honest about this too. I'm a little concerned about Jimmy Butler's shooting. And not all the 3-point shoot. Like we know he's a bad 3-point shooter. For some reason, he still thinks that he can shoot the 3-pointers. It doesn't work. My concern with him is he's missing some of these shots in the lane. And I'm not just talking about the layup against the Hawks. Some of these shots that he can get, they're just not falling. Hopefully they eventually do. But I'm saying all this because the question is about Victor Oladipo and whose minutes he's going to take. Tyler Hero may be this team's best pure scorer right now. They're not going to be his. So whose minutes would Victor Oladipo take? And what matchups do you see Victor Oladipo, especially in the playoffs, him coming in and being the biggest boost of this Heat team for?
I think, first of all, he would just fractionalize other players' minutes. In other words, maybe Duncan plays 2 fewer, Max Strus plays 2 fewer, Gabe Vincent plays 3 fewer, and you sort of build an opportunity. But if you looked at, say, Sunday's game against the Lakers, when the Lakers went small, when they were playing at times LeBron James is center, and honestly, at times Stanley Johnson is center.
Yeah.
So if you get a small ball matchup, and the example I'm giving you this, Clay, is for this reason. Dwayne Dedmon only played 8 minutes against the Lakers. He actually had good minutes, but he only played 8 minutes against the Lakers. They went small. The Heat went small. So in the right playoff matchup, Brooklyn tends to play small.
Mm-hmm.
You can play smaller against the Bulls because Vucevic is going to shoot his 3-pointers more likely than be in the paint. So if you get the right matchup, how does Victor Oladipo play? He takes, sounds odd, Dwayne Dedmon's minutes. And you're playing small ball. But we mentioned earlier in the show here on the Slomin's Home Security Inside the Paint show, when you look at the situation against Cleveland, you're probably not going small when they're playing Mobley and they're playing Markkanen and they're playing Jared Allen. When you go against the Sixers, you're sure as hell not going small against Joel Embiid, or even if they bring Drummond off the bench. So where does Victor play? In a small ball lineup, it'll work itself out. There'll be Bam's minutes. There'll be minutes with P.J. Tucker at center. Hell, there might be minutes, where you wind up with Jimmy Butler at center because the other team's going so small. So it will be matchup-based, probably dictated by who you wind up playing. Again, we do this every week. It's like a weekly exercise. You go back to the Heat primary starting lineup. We have Duncan in there for now. So you have Bam, you have Tucker, you have Duncan, you have Jimmy, you have Kyle. Everyone is whole. So your next group off the bench, Tyler Hero is clearly your 6th man. If you're using a center, you're playing Dwayne Dedmon. Everyone loves, I believe there's a TV show, everyone loves Caleb. So you're playing Caleb Martin and you're playing Max Strus. So then you get to the Gabe Vincent minutes. You're not going deeper than 10.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, no one in the Heat plays 10 men in the playoffs, going from Pat Riley to Stan Van Gundy to Eric Spoelstra. So that'll be another issue there. You can probably, like I said, fractionalize, take a couple of minutes shave here and there. It's going to be harder. So I think matchups will help the Heat more than anything. Or Gabe Vincent will be asked to, hey, thanks for all the help. See you in Summer League. See you in the summer program, and then go on from there. You will play your best players.
I gave my hot take, my pro Tyler Hero hot take. Here's my my con Tyler Hero hot take. Victor Oladipo is a perfect replacement for Tyler Hero down the stretch of games when you go offense, defense. And obviously, look, if you're trailing by 2 and you're choosing between the 2, you want Tyler Hero on the floor. If you're up by 2, you don't want what happened against Sacramento a couple of weeks ago, where you can hunt Tyler Hero in a matchup.
Gets to the foul line. Now, Clay, I would go a little different. If you're down 2, I might still go to Victor Oladipo because you're only down 2. But if you're down 5 with a minute to go or something, then I want the explosiveness, what Eric Spoelstra loves using the word, the ignitability. So that is a little bit different. So in those situations, you might say we'll sacrifice the defense a little bit more. That's been a problem for the Heat at times. When they played Hero and they played Robinson at the end, there was a couple of games, Bam, foul trouble, things like that. You have to go in that direction. And that does get dangerous because the Lakers were hunting the Duncan Robinson match as well. So it's not just Duncan. It's Tyler also. Yes, Eric Spoelstra will say they're improving his defenders, but when you're going from a 1 and you get to a 4, yes, you're making improvement, but in clutch playoff situations, you could darn well bet they're going to be hunting those switches and those mismatches.
Now, I mean, think of this. If you're a Heat fan, like, what is the one thing that can lose you a playoff game down the stretch? I would be terrified of the idea of James Harden or Kyrie Irving one-on-one against Tyler Hero at the end of the game.
Yep.
I would be terrified about Drew Holiday finding a way to get isolated on Tyler Hero or Duncan Robinson at the end of a game. What Victor Oladipo does is he gives you a player that you feel confident. Now, look, I mean, we're talking about some of the best scorers at the guard position in the world. So, like, they're still going to beat Victor Oladipo occasionally, or maybe more than 50% of the time. But it's not going to be a case where Victor Oladipo is overmatched. You feel confident because of his defensive ability. Like, I think the thing with Vic is, I don't think any of us reasonably expect him to return to 2018 Victor Oladipo when it comes to explosiveness.
Too many surgeries.
Yeah, high flying. But the footwork is still fantastic. I mean, the ability to kind of guard what we saw with him in that short stretch with the Heat last year. Mm-hmm. Yeah, short sample size, but that doesn't go away as quickly as the ability to jump from the foul line and dunk on people. No, when you're asking, and this is all coming from the question, when you're asking whose minutes does Victor Oladipo take, I think your point, during a long stretch, you're going to fractionalize the other minutes. But in short stretches, you can see where he would really benefit you against the best teams in the East. So Knicks coming up tonight, Clippers coming up on Friday. And then Saturday night, refresh my memory. Who's coming on Saturday?
Well, it's interesting because you have the Clippers on Friday, Toronto on Saturday, off Sunday, at Boston Monday, at Toronto Tuesday. Now, Clay Ferraro might say, hey, Ira, I thought the NBA got rid of 4 games in 5 nights. And they did. However, when the San Antonio game was postponed right after Christmas before New Year's, the league had to sort of rework the schedule. So they added 4 games in 5 nights to the Heat when they've legislated them out. So starting on that Friday game, you're going to have the Heat playing Clippers Friday home, Raptors Saturday home, off Sunday so they can watch football, Monday in Boston, Tuesday in Toronto. That's a hell of a stretch for an older team. That's a hell of a stretch for a team that doesn't know if it's getting Kyle Lowry back or when it's getting him back, that's having to deal with Canadian COVID rules, which make going in and out of Toronto not necessarily as even as flying in late night after a Boston game. That could be a no-sleep night. That's going to be challenging. On one hand, the Heat are better than all those teams, have better records than all those teams. But I'm not going to sit here, Clay Ferraro, and tell you they're going to win all 4, because I think that's going to be a series where Eric Spoelstra is going to have to say, I'm going to have to rest this guy. I'm going to have to give this guy the night off, and it'll be interesting to see how he approaches it. Obviously, the Clippers are not a conference game, but the other 3 are, so that means a little bit more, because like we're talking the whole show, if only 2 games separate number 1 and number 6, you're going to have all kinds of tiebreakers in place. We saw that last year with the Heat. If you win the division, you jump ahead of the Knicks because division's the second tiebreaker. Then head-to-head means something. So conference wins could mean something also. It's going to be a really interesting schedule for the Heat 4 and 5.
I don't usually like to be don't be surprised if guy. Like, I don't want to just throw stuff out there, but this is something that we've already talked about on this show within the last couple of weeks, but I want to refresh people's memories on this. That game Tuesday night in Toronto, especially more so now that you're talking about 4 games in 5 nights.
Right.
We've seen teams kind of travel with a skeleton crew to Toronto for games.
Warriors did it, yes.
Warriors did it, and there are reasons for that. You don't want to take a chance on losing a player because of testing positive.
After COVID testing, yes.
There are different protocols in place. So,
and no
again,
fans.
I don't mean to be don't be surprised if guy, but I'm gonna. Don't be surprised if on Tuesday night you may not see the full Heat team traveling across the border to Toronto for that game. And as much as you don't like to say this, you want to be careful. You want to be cautious. So looking ahead to that game, it may not be the same sort of roster.
Clay, I'm the same way. I'm actually going to be in Boston covering the game Monday night, and I'm flying home to cover the Toronto game remotely for this reason. I have to provide a PCR test 48 hours out to get into Canada, and I then have to be in possession of a PCR test within the next 48 hours to get out of Canada. So basically what I would have to do is I'd have to land in Boston on Sunday, find a testing site, and get a 48-hour turnaround that is not that easy these days, like amid Omicron. Then on Monday, when the Heat play the Celtics, I'd have to get a PCR test that day as my ticket out of Toronto and get that result before I get to Toronto. So for me, and the Toronto beat writers have been the same way. They've done long trips where they've come over when the Raptors are playing 3 or 4 or 5 road games in the States, so they don't have to go back and forth. So it is a very unusual situation. I agree. I could see them leaving guys in the hotel in Boston, having the plane circle back to Logan, pick the guys up, and then take them off to San Antonio that they play that Thursday. It's a long trip. It starts Monday in Boston, Tuesday in Toronto, Thursday in San Antonio. It's a really long trip. Saturday in Charlotte, Monday in Washington, 2 days off, goes all the way to the February 10th trading deadline when they play in New Orleans. So it's a long haul, and it'll be really interesting to see how they do manage it.
And on this, Canes 1989, is this team title ready? The answer is yes. Doesn't mean they're going to win, but they are absolutely title ready, and they are in that group of teams at the very top of the NBA that it would not surprise you at all if they brought home a ring. The Larry O'B trophy.
Because you know what's going to happen? It's almost going to be like the scene in Anchorman when you have all the newsmen going against each other. So the Heat's parade is going to end at the Dade County border. The Panthers parade is going to come from the north at the Dade County. And I do think there will be some sort of night fight at Hard Rock Stadium when they meet right there at County Line Road. So it'll be an interesting end of June, I think, for both of our winter sports teams.
It's going to be the Spider-Man meme where they're both like pointing at each other. Like, exactly. All right, guys, you've been great as always. We appreciate you guys really help drive the show. Please make sure to smash the like button. Stay tuned. The Big O rolls on next right here. And thanks so much for joining us right here on Inside the Paint.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.